All right. We should be live on ROKFIN. So, hello everybody who's watching. We got Will Harris here. He runs White Oak Pastures. Where are you in Georgia? Where
Yeah,
Tennessee?
I'm in Georgia, almost
Georgia.
Alabama, almost Florida.
Okay. And we're going to be talking about the cattle deaths. So, the first thing I want to show you real fast, Will, just to kind of, get into the mainstream coverage of this, because we're going to talk about what I think, the news doesn't really tell people a whole lot, is the background in some of this stuff. At least 2,000 cattle dead in Kansas heat, adding pain to beleaguered industry. Kansas is the third largest U.S. cattle state behind Texas and Nebraska, with more than 2.4 million cattle in feedlots. So they do talk about feedlots briefly. They talk about temperatures, humidity, soaring. They've got more than 2.4 million cattle in feedlots in Kansas, third largest in the U.S. And then it says deaths add pain to the U.S. cattle industry as producers have reduced herds due to drought and grappled with feed costs that climbed as Russia's invasion of Ukraine tightened global grain supplies. The spokesperson for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment said the deaths were tallied based on the number of carcasses the agency was called to dispose of. And, then just goes back on to talk about the weather. But you really don't see anything about how does that affect farming or agriculture, or like this specificity of this part of the food system, the concentrated animal feeding operation. So maybe we should just start with when you hear that narrative, you just hear it sort of teed up like it's really hot, it's really humid. By the way, there's lots of cattle. Sorry, no, they're not all cows. So you have all these animals together in these concentrated animal feeding operations. They give you the numbers and stuff, but that's basically it. What's your initial reaction to that? And maybe you should tell people who you are, by the way, what you do. Maybe we should start there.
Sure. So I'm Will Harris. White Oak Pastures is the name of my farm in Bluffton, Georgia. We pasture raise 5 different red meat species: cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits. And we hand butcher them in a USDA inspected facility here on the farm. We pasture raise 5 poultry species: chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, ducks. We hand butcher them in a separate USDA inspected facility here. We raise organic vegetables, honey, pastured eggs, a number of other ancillary businesses. I should tell you that I'm the 4th generation of my family to run this farm. My daughters, who are the 5th, are helping me run it these days, and they have babies. So we're a 6th generation farm, been in constant operation since 1866. And more importantly, all that to tell you, in my lifetime, we've come full circle from a very resilient production model that focused heavily, entirely, on the animals, the land, and the community, to my father's watch post World War II, in which he was part of an industrial commodity centralized system. I came home from the University of Georgia in 1976 and further industrialized, commoditized, centralized the farm. Then about 20 years ago, I started moving back to the resilient model that was more similar to what my great-grandfather and grandfather did. So I'm a one-trick pony, but this is my trick. And I do know a good bit about how these things occur.
Okay, let's look real fast too at your farm, because as you were saying, you all went through the phase. When you talk, maybe you could go into that just a little bit more.
So
what are the Will, real fast, when we were talking about that article, the NBC article, and you talk about the stage that your father went through, are you saying it's similar to what we're talking about here?
I used to run a feedlot here on the farm. We don't anymore, but we have fed cattle in confinement on what we call a TMR, total mixed ration, where they weren't grazing at all; they were eating out of a trough.
Okay. And so what was it like with cattle in those situations versus cattle where I'll show you, this is where we are now, with White Oak Pastures. And here I'll just go to meet us. Okay. So this is what we're looking at, right? With your, I'll show you, make this big while you're talking so people can see video of your farm. But yeah, tell us the biggest difference, I guess.
The we during the watch of my father and me from 1945 to about 1995, we ran the farm as though it was a factory. A lot of industrial farmers bristle today when you call it a factory farm. The first thing they say is, "Well, White Oak Pastures has 180 employees. It's more of a factory." In fact, that's my processing plants right there that you just had the aerial view of. Our processing plants look more like a factory than a lot of farms, but it's not. What makes a factory farm a factory farm is it's run in a very linear manner. Usually monocultural. Usually there's pigs at the pig factory, cows at the cow factory, chickens at the chicken factory, etc. Uh, Applying a lot of reductionist science, which is really good in a linear model. We have, as a nation's industry, agriculture has tried to apply the factory model to a very complex system, and it didn't work well. There were unintended consequences, and these cattle you see dying are part of that unintended consequence. And we can, the degradation of the soil is one of the unintended consequences. The uh, uh, carbon that we put up into the atmosphere is an unintended consequence. Animal welfare issues are another unintended consequence. So we can go on and on and on. We achieved incredible efficiency with the factory farm model. It led into incredible scale, which gave incredible efficiency. But we traded all of our resiliency for that efficiency. What we do here is highly resilient, not highly efficient, but highly resilient.
What does it mean when you say resilient, with the conditions that, say, okay, you have a heat wave comes through, and what does it mean for cattle to be more resilient to that? Like specifically.
I don't think I've ever lost a cow to heat stroke ever. Uh, you know, Resilience means the ability to withstand adversity, and certainly we're not bulletproof. We're bullet resistant. It could get so hot here that my cattle started dying of heat stroke, but we've got about 3,000 head on the farm right now, and it's probably as hot in Georgia as it is in Kansas, and we didn't lose any.
You all posted this on Instagram. I'll just read a quick paragraph of it, and everyone can go follow you guys on Instagram. You're pretty active there. I think that's where I follow you. I've learned a lot over the years. So they write, cattle evolved on this earth grazing pastures and plains. The life these cattle lived in confined animal feeding operations is completely unnatural. While these industrial raised livestock have access to food and water, they are in a constant state of stress. The stress is the result of the animals being deprived of the ability to express this instinct. Bare dirt reflects the sun as opposed to trees and grass, which absorb much of the sun's radiation through photosynthesis. And it goes on to describe how your pasture grazing, regenerative model is different. The primary reason for these animals' deaths is that industrial animal feeding turns these cattle in an incredibly obese creature that would never occur in nature. It is not uncommon for these feedlot animals to have 0.75 inches of back fat, where grass-fed cattle might have 0.2 inches of back fat. And no wonder these animals can't handle the stress even before the heat. they were already slowly dying from the diseases of obesity and sedentary lifestyles that kill most of us human. I fail to understand how big food companies can believe that eating dying animals is good for us. If left in our pastures, our cattle would live to a normal life expectancy of 20 plus years. If left in a feedlot, industrial animals would not accomplish a quarter of that. So let's talk a little bit about that specifically too. You know, when I guess like a lot of people, I mean, I'll be honest, 12 years ago when I started reporting on agriculture in mainstream news, I went to do some story on these ear tags they were starting to use that they could like electronically track cattle through feedlots. And I had never heard of a feedlot before. Whenever I went to do stories, if it was like a big food company, they'd always just hand you a press release, like a press kit pamphlet, and the front would have would have cattle on grass. That even that was just, I just thought that's how it worked. I had never heard of it. And so when I asked my basic question, why are you putting an electronic tag in the ear? And the rancher said, so that when it goes to Iowa, which he called Iowa, I guess that's the Tennessee way of saying it. But when it was going to go to Iowa, they would be able to track it in the feedlot. And I said, what is a feedlot? And they explained it to me. I'm like, well, holy damn, I had never heard of that before. I thought they all ate grass. So I mean, I didn't even know this was necessarily a thing. I was really ignorant. The last 12 to 10 years, has been quite a learning lesson for me. But some people would say this is just how it has to be because we just have lots of people, and maybe there's like lots of people who don't really want to know. So what do you think got us here? What I guess what ultimately is responsible for where we're at?
I think that the desire to have obscenely cheap, wastefully abundant food got us here. Uh, we I think we treat food way too casually, it's led to horrible unintended consequences in terms of animal welfare, in terms of the environment, in terms of the impoverishment of rural America, uh, and probably in terms of our health. But I don't really get into that. I leave that to the nutritionist. I don't, I'm not a nutritionist, but I do know that the impact of this incredibly scaled up factory farming has had devastating uh, consequences on the animals, the environment, our land and water, and on the rural America. We literally impoverished rural America.
There have been a lot of articles like this that have come out because we'll talk in a second about there still are. I mean, there are a lot of people who are concerned about the food supply chain and food shortages. There have been food processing plants that have caught fire, quite a few of them. And so there's, a lot of questions out there about intentionality. Like, is there an immediate and intentional threat to the food system? What you're describing is more of a insidious, chronic problem. And me, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm on a journey of learning through like the what's going on really behind the scenes, and I don't ultimately know. But when you see stuff like this, factcheck.org, Kansas cattle died after unusual heat wave, contrary to baseless claims online, and they go on to talk about the heat wave we've discussed, and that it's not uncommon, that this just happens, and that then it says the bovine deaths were followed by a wave of baseless claims online. One talking about, they're calling it larger conspiracy theories about supposed disruptions to the food supply. And what I think is interesting when you see these debates is it's like you have one camp, the factcheck.org or the NBC camp, that just says, this is just the way it is, folks. It's not, don't look behind the curtain because those are all conspiracies. This is just the way it is. It's just a heat wave. And they don't really go much further than that. Or you have on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who, are really concerned about there being very intentional and very nefarious immediate attacks. somewhere in the middle is you, where you're like, well, you don't have to necessarily give up the intentionality of it, because has there been intention from special interests or whoever else that have gotten us to the point that we're at, where you have such a vulnerable supply chain? And I think it's interesting that when you read mainstream articles about, or you watch corporate television, which is my old industry, it always seems to kind of keep you at the surface level. Then when they allegedly fact check the deeper stuff, it's not really talking about the stuff you're discussing. Like, it doesn't channel you in a direction where you could start learning more about the food system. It just basically says, those people are wackadoodles, don't look over there. And then people just walk away thinking, oh yeah, it's just hot. It's just hot. There's no there's no problem here other than the weather, and we can't fix the weather, so just move on. And I think you can kind of get lost in that debate and miss what you're trying to get across.
Well, let me see if I can shed a little light here.
Yeah, please do.
I frequently compare where big tobacco was in the 60s to where big food, big ag is today. I don't think that R.J. Reynolds and the boys came up with cigarettes because they wanted to kill a bunch of people from cancer. But I do think that they made billions of dollars selling cigarettes to people who got cancer. And when the information first surfaced that uh, uh, cigarettes aren't good for you, smoking cigarettes is not good for you. But people didn't know that until probably the 60s. The first people that knew it were probably the people who were making billions of dollars selling cigarettes. They didn't immediately roll over and say, hey, guess what, everybody? We've been killing you. We've made a lot of money selling you a product that's killing you and doing some other bad things. That didn't happen. That's not the way that works. And the reason the agriculture evolved into the factory model, the very linear, scalable factory model, is they could produce an incredible amount of food obscenely cheap. Instead, they could sell it to people, and people didn't know any better. Just like smoking cigarettes, they thought it was fine, just fine, not hurting me, not hurting the environment, not hurting rural America. It's just fine, something we do. And now the information is starting to surface that the way we're raising our food in this country is probably bad for animals, bad for the land, bad for the climate, bad for the water, bad for certainly rural America, and maybe it may not be good for you either when you're eating it. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, but maybe not. So you can't expect the big food companies, big ag, you can expect them to treat that information the same way R.J. Reynolds and the boys did with cigarettes in the 60s. So, are people intentionally destroying the food supply today? And I don't know that. I'm not making that accusation. I read it, but I don't know that. But I can tell you, as an expert in the field, that we have developed a system that has very, very little resilience to anything that goes wrong. When we had the pandemic panic, uh, pig farmers and poultry farmers were euthanizing chickens and pigs because they had a delay in slaughter. Uh, we didn't do that. We have our own processing plants, and we never missed a day processing. And if we had, my animals wouldn't have died. They have the resilience. They would have kept living.
Okay, before I want to get into that actually real fast, because I think one of the places where those of us who are like really, can go down that rabbit hole, skeptical of what's going on, where it gets kind of crazy for us, is that you just talked about how you have your own processing plants, and so you didn't have the same issues that these massive packing houses did during COVID. But I know one of the reasons why a lot of smaller ranchers don't have that is because of USDA regulation. So then you ask, well, wait, if the government really wants us to have food, they talk about food, meal programs for kids and people don't have enough food and hunger in the United States and the food pyramid and all that stuff. But yet the regulations reflect a government that doesn't actually seem to care that much about the health and welfare of its citizens, to make things easier, maybe even more affordable, more nutritious. And so you're like, well, why would they do that? But before we get to that, don't forget, I don't know if Will is a wine drinker, but you are? Okay. Phew. It's always awkward when the guest goes, no, I don't drink. Like, okay, well, I'll just pull you out of the stream real fast. But don't forget, everybody, that there is no shortage as of yet. However, you should still go to AllisonWinePromo.com. And if, in fact, you are going to have a steak this summer, you're going to go to White Oak Pastures and get yourself a steak, nothing pairs better with it than AllisonWinePromo.com. You get 50% off my favorite Malbecs and 50% off shipping. We got a Rogue Malbec here from 6,000 feet that comes from hand-picked grapes, another one from almost 9,000 feet, and one that uses natural fermentation. These are wines from very remote, high-altitude regions. So not wines you're going to get at the grocery store. Go check them out. You can also go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, which is USDA certified organic, high-altitude Nicaraguan coffees. As I've said before, there is a limited black edition, which is very good. You could go check that out. But if you're a tea drinker, get the Caturra tea. It's tea made from the fruit that's around the coffee bean. I like to cold brew mine for 24 hours. It's very good. It's like a black tea. There's a wide variety of roasts here, so go check them out. Okay, so let's get back to my question then, if you don't mind.
Let's get back to the wine.
Okay, let's get back to the wine. Let's go back.
I'm a Shiraz guy, but Malbec is my next in line. I think it's very interesting. You've got one named Gaucho.
Yeah, I do. Gaucho. Is that what you're called?
Well, if I spoke Spanish, it would be. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Compa is
Gaucho is cowboy in Argentina.
Yeah. It says Compa is slang for friend used by the gauchos of Argentina. Natural fermentation, zero filtration, not available at your local supermarket or fine wine shop. A cowboy wouldn't go to a fine wine shop anyway, right?
We tend to be rogues too. First of all, rogue, but it has little to do with the cows.
This I know comes from an extremely small operation in Argentina, very, very small vineyard. And I really appreciate my sponsors because they're very unique and focused on the health of the communities, that they're in. And I don't know, it's cool to work with them because they've got unique products. And like my coffee sponsor, twinenginecoffee.com, the guy that owns it is American, but everybody lives down in Nicaragua. And it's just, they're all communities. And kind of like you're talking about how you've developed your own ecosystem, to switch it back to you, but thank you for the help with the sponsors.
Actually, let me say one more thing about that. So we are no longer, I used to be part of the big beef food production system. And now we're not part of that. We are our own little tiny system. When I was part of the big beef system, I had 3 or 4 minimum wage employees. Today we've got 180 employees that make well above the county average.
Interesting.
So it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's not just what it does for the animals not dying of heat stroke. It's what it does for the community. This is considered by some standards to be the poorest county in America. Clay County, Georgia, according to Wikipedia in 2020, was the poorest county in the United States from a household income perspective. We've got 180 employees in this county. We're the largest employer in the county, and we write $5 million worth of payroll checks a year in the poorest county in the nation. So we're very proud of that.
So what do you think about my question then related to the government? And, somebody on ROKFIN said something about, the government paying farmers to destroy crops. I know corn gets subsidized, so it's like we incentivize certain kinds of farming practices over others. The whole idea of public safety, being the reason that we have these, food safety regulations that I think we could argue, have a healthy debate about whether they actually keep people safe, but they certainly keep the system, um, the way that it is, or at least make it harder to break away from it. Obviously, you guys did, and I'd like to know more about how you did that, because I know a lot of people who raise cattle who would like to or have a hard time finding a consumer base. But what do you think about that? Like, the government on one hand says that it's trying to keep the public safe. They care about food issues. You always hear, it's often the first lady, talking about food, cafeteria food, and trying to keep kids healthy, and trying to reduce obesity in America and all that stuff. But then it just seems like the regulations, often I hear from people, continue to support the opposite system. And so I think for the skeptic, it's like, if the government, or if there wasn't intention, if there wasn't collusion, I guess, between sort of the profit and the government, not profit, PROPHET, but PROFIT, and the government, then we would be able to break this a little bit easier. But it's a much harder nut to crack because of that, and it makes it seem like it's a lot more intentional.
Having built a USDA inspected red meat plant from the ground up and a USDA inspected poultry plant from the ground up, I know a little bit about that. So here's the deal. All the food safety laws and regulations that are in place because somebody somewhere did something stupid or illegal or immoral that put people at risk. They're all in place for that reason. Now, when you leave that point, you will find that the USDA regulations are far more onerous to be complied with at a small plant than they are at a big plant. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There are plants that will slaughter 400 head of cattle per hour. 400 head per hour of 12, 13, 1,400 pound fat cattle. We slaughter about 100 head per week. We have a USDA inspector standing there watching us slaughter every cow we slaughter. The guy that's at the plant with 400 head, there's more than one, but it's just an incredible amount of activity going on for him to inspect. Let's talk about poultry. On a big day, we'll slaughter 1,000 chickens, and a USDA inspector standing there looking at every chicken if he wants to. At a big plant where they're slaughtering 250,000 a day, they're going by on a conveyor belt like this. So there's a lot more inspecting going on at a small plant than there is at a big plant, just due to the sheer numbers and volume. So it's a more onerous task to keep those people satisfied. In addition, the cost of providing what we have to provide, the office for the inspector and the other things we have to accommodate, you have so much more economy of scale to put it over in a big industrial plant. And there's such a thing as lobbyists. JBS is a Brazilian company, and Smithfield is a Chinese company, and Will Harris White Oak Pastures is an American company. But I bet you those big multinational corporations hold a lot more sway with people who write the regulations and the people who administer the regulations, due to the incredible work done by lobbyists. I don't have a lobbyist.
Right, me neither. Should really start looking for one. There's a lobbyist in the chat that wants to work for either Will or me. Let us know, and we'll take you on. It's got to be free though.
To work cheap for Will or me. Yeah.
What'd you say?
Yeah, he's got to work cheap. Or
cheap, yeah. Well, you could probably feed some food. I'm not even sure I have that to offer. Media training, I don't know. So,
I can fix you up.
Okay, I take questions over on my locals community, so I want to go there real fast and just grab some of those. If you're not watching this on locals later, consider going over to alsamaro.locals.com, join my editorial board. They can post questions ahead of time. This is just a long comment, which, I'll read the end of, basically running through kind of history of some of the stuff you were talking about. But these cattle are as metabolically dysfunctional as our sickened society. So I wouldn't be surprised if these die-offs were not a part of some evil plot to make us vegan insectivores. But I would neither be surprised if some of it was engineered. The lobby against the consumption of meat may be spearheaded by true believers, but it is being pushed hard by Big Ag, Bill Gates, and his BMGF, the Dietetic Association's others. It can be both, and it probably is. So that's one comment. One question: do you currently see more farmers moving towards raising pasture-fed animals, or do you think it's going to take a massive shift in food culture or a food crisis to make this switch? And do you worry about certain animal breeds dying out as the market currently favors fast and fat-growing animals?
I don't worry about animal breeds dying out. There's a lot of reasons for that. The first part, though, remember that again, Allison.
Yeah. Do you currently see more farmers moving towards pasture-fed animals?
The answer is yes. I think there are a lot of farmers that would like to go to a non-industrial system, a more resilient system. There's a matter of being able to afford to do it. Farmers are not going to get to decide how much of this we're going to do, how much of this kind of farming we're going to do. Consumers are going to decide how much of this we're going to do. When I was early at this party. I started converting over in the mid-90s, 25 or more years ago. And I was very fortunate in that I'd inherited a nice farm with no debt. And we were really good cattle producers, and I could afford to do it. I could afford to raise cattle like I wanted to and make a little less money and still pay my bills and live the standard of living that I thought I should. Most farmers don't have that luxury. They've got to follow the signals sent by the market. So consumers will make those decisions. But I think it's a mixed bag as far as some farmers who would go kicking and screaming to leave the industrial model and come to this kinder, gentler production system. And there are others that would love to do it, but the consumers will make the decision.
Mm-hmm. Right, I agree. That's why I talk about our responsibility as consumers too. There are a lot of concerns about price and whatnot. A lot of people say, well, could we afford that if we all went to that model? I'm curious what you think about that. But also when I talk to people from the producer standpoint, I run into two kinds most of the time. One, which is, I would like to do that, but I don't know how to get into it. I have some grass fed, but I can't find enough consumers to sell to. And then the other that just writes it off as enviro hippie nonsense that can't feed the country, there's just no way to do it. So I guess my, two quick questions there is like, well, do you ever get those questions about costs? Like, I just can't support that kind of agriculture. If we go to that kind of agriculture, people won't be able to afford food. Or the other question, do you find that dichotomy, producers who want to do it but feel like they can't find the consumer base, or those that just are like, I just think you're nuts?
That was a lot of different questions.
Okay, let's do one.
Let me just unpack it slowly.
Okay.
So first of all, cost. When you take away the tools that remove costs from production, you raise the cost of production. That's not real difficult. So yes, it will cost more at the checkout counter. Yes. Now, but let's go a little bit deeper. Is industrial food really cheap, or is it just have costs that are externalized away from it? For instance, if you raise cattle on feed that's used a lot of fertilizer, a lot of insecticides, or pesticides, And all that washes down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico and creates a huge dead spot that's bigger than a New England state. Who pays for that? That's a cost. That's a hell of a cost. Who pays for it? And the answer is you're not paying for it when you're buying your $4 a pound ground beef. So somebody else is paying for it, the government or nobody, or it's not you. So, and we can go on and on of scenarios where the way we're producing food is costing incredible amounts of money, but they're externalized. They're not in the transaction between big ag, big food, and the consumer. So and I don't know those numbers. I can't tell you what $4 ground beef would cost if you had to clean up the Gulf of Mexico out of it, or uh, the cost of all this, the fires and the tsunamis and the hurricanes and cyclones because of global warming, that is not in the big ag, big food consumer transaction. So I don't know if the food's that cheap. Now let's go to the next thing I think I heard you say is, can you feed the population of the earth raising animals, raising food the way we do it here at White Oak Pastures?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is, first of all, get used to the fact that the earth does not have an unlimited carrying capacity. You can't put so many people in a telephone booth, and you can't feed but so many people with the abundance that the land produces. Uh, and I'm one of the good old boys that farmed very industrially, University of Georgia College of Agriculture in the 70s. Loved technical answers, loved technology to solve problems. But so I still have conversations with my old peer group. And the question always comes up, well, Will, what you doing there? It's kind of cute, it's kind of nice, but you can't feed the world like that. And I have a response, and the response is, well, we got to talk about it. If food per acre is the limiting factor, then your system is better than mine because you can produce more food on an acre of feedlot than I can in a huge paddock grazing grass. You win. But if the limiting factor that stops food production on the earth is fossil fuel, my system's better. I can feed a lot more people than you can on a barrel of oil. If it's water that we run short of, I can feed more people than you because I'm a more efficient user of water than you are. If it's antibiotics that the pathogens are not immune to, I win. My system wins. I don't do that. If it's phosphate or potassium that are mined reductively from then I win. And I can go on with dozens and dozens of scenarios in which my farming system, my food production system will feed more people than the industrial system. But if it's just acres of land, I lose.
Okay. One of my neighbors is an 80-year-old retired cattle rancher. He said he is friends with a guy who gives agricultural loans nationally. His friend told him that he personally knows of 80 food processing plants that have caught fire this year. How weird does this farm owner find that? My neighbor thinks something weird is going on, but I don't know how often they usually have these types of problems.
Me either. I don't know how often. I mean, I don't know statistically how uncommon that is. I'm not. I, I can't take a side in that.
Okay, I see cattle in the fields of Texas. Is the choke point in the processing transport part of the chain?
No, it's not in. It's not in transport. Uh, I don't know that we've even got a choke point right now. During the pandemic panic, when people were having to euthanize animals, it was because of employees being sick and not being able to come to work, which is certainly understandable, and that was a choke point, but it didn't last long. We have a processing plant here, and we were very fortunate in that our people were, when we COVID was not as hard on us here in rural South Georgia as it seemed to be in many places. Just about everybody that works here got it, including me and all my family. But we had one hospitalization out of 180 employees, and most of whom tested positive at some point. So we kept working right through it, and I'm grateful for that because it could have been different. I told you we're bullet resistant, not bulletproof. My people could have gotten sick and not been able to work, but they did.
Okay. Do you feel the cause of cattle deaths could possibly be something other than nature or on the ground poisoning, such as EMF or even directed energy weapons or chemtrail sprays?
It absolutely could possibly be something else. It could be something very sinister. It could be any of those things that you list there. I'm just saying it could not be. It could, it could be as stupidly innocent as an employee's not tending the cattle as they should, and a pipe broke and they went without water for 6 hours. You're a negligent employee. It could be that. And I'm not judgmental. I'm not saying it was. It could be a death ray, or it could be a lazy employee that drank a 6-pack of beer during lunch and didn't come back and do what he was supposed to do.
That's definitely how a lot of terrible news ends up on the TV. I mean, I don't know about getting the 6-pack though. Back in the day, my coworker said it was very common to do cocaine and drink in the newsroom. But now you just go to 7-Eleven and get a Slurpee, but there are other ways that you just put on stupid news. But it is, I talk a lot about how, I do believe journalists are intentionally manipulated by propaganda and that it's directed propaganda. But the vast majority of the people who are part of the system are not thinking that way. They're not thinking, I'm part of some sinister plot. I'm part of trying to brainwash all the people around me. They think that they're part of something good. They're doing some good service. I think most people, want to sleep at night and have figured out ways to do the mental gymnastics. And most people I say are the stormtroopers, are not Darth Vader. Okay, so please do.
I wish everybody's listening would write down the word resilience. We've given up our resilience. Here we're talking about cattle getting hot, going well. If my cattle were not fed for 2 days, it'd be okay. I've never done that, and they'd be mad as hell, but they'd be okay. If a cow goes without water for just a few hours, and there's a very efficient little watering system there, but it's been out for 6 hours, and they have to stand there in line to drink water, and the bigger, more aggressive ones don't want to give up their space. You can have a train wreck due to lack of resilience that doesn't have any nefarious intent behind it. And I think it's just as bad. I think it's just as bad to allow chronic, ongoing lack of resilience as it is to have a nefarious scheme. In both cases, it's wrong with horrible consequences.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point specifically, but then also, like I said, from the information warfare standpoint, I think that some of the powers that be, that's the only way I know how to describe it, would love for the debate to just be, like I said, what we talked about earlier, which is the fact checkers, which are like, nothing to see here. It's just hot, it's just hot, and we'll get through it. And there's just nothing you can do, or the people who are like, somebody just sent, napalm rocket to the CAFO. And then those two just argue with each other while, you're in the middle of going, there's lots of stuff we could actually talk about, and each side, on the extremes are writing each other off. Not to say that the more nefarious stuff, doesn't or hasn't happened, just to say that all this other stuff that you could affect rarely gets discussed in the noise, I think. And the fact checkers will just fact check the most extreme versions without giving you, any perspective on how there are serious problems that need to be discussed. Okay. That's my rant. Real fast over at Locals, there was a question about fuel and other costs that have gone up. And then another question about candy manufacturers selling candy waste as cow feed. Is that real?
That's real. That's definitely real.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
No,
What kind of candy?
all kinds. And the plastic and all goes in. Nobody unwraps all of those little. Probably they grind the whole thing. Plastic, the container, plastic container,
Oh my. So, all right. So you just get like bulk candy that has plastic wrappers on it. It's just all put in a food processor of some kind, and then they just give it to the cows.
I give you my word, it is.
Is that a lot of places, or is that just a few places? Like, how common is that?
That's where all the candy. That candy is not thrown away. I mean, it's not just candy. It's Twinkies and uh, honey buns and
Oh my god!
bread. All that food that is taken back. The is used in animal feed at some point. There's. I mean, that's a business. In fact, if you so in the 70s, when I was taking animal nutrition at the University of Georgia, we had a book called Feeds and Feeding by Arthur E. Cullison. And a lot of that book was taken up by giving the nutritional value of all the many common ingredients, thousands of common ingredients. And it would be things like alfalfa and corn and soy that you would expect. But it would also be bakery waste and actually chicken manure from chicken houses. It may still be, but back then was very commonly fed to cattle in confinement.
Okay, so I'm trying to like put my mind in the place of who thinks this is a good idea. Are they like, well, it's mostly corn, so or it's just calories? I mean, how does a nutritionist do that math in their head that's a good thing?
Metabolizable energy, protein by the amino acid. I mean, it's a what's the word here? It's like formulating. In fact, it's called formulation. But you actually take the analysis of the excess product and that's no longer fit for human consumption. And once you break it down into fat, protein, and carbohydrate, then you use it in the formulation. You know how much fat, protein, and carbohydrate the chicken or pig or cow needs, and that becomes one of the ingredients to provide that daily nutrition. TDN, total daily nutrition.
Somebody wrote, it's not you are what you eat anymore. It's you are what you eat ate. I mean, I guess it's always been like that, but so regularly you're not hearing like if the folks that are kind of like, yeah, this is what we do, or in the ag science classes or the nutrition classes say that these things would be, I don't know, that there could be some kind of connection between the rise of obesity and diabetes and chronic disease and heart disease in the United States and what we're feeding our livestock. Twinkies. I mean,
my daddy paid good money for me to go to the University of Georgia and learn ruminant nutrition, animal nutrition under A.E. Cullison. So I can talk to you about that for a long, long time. Now, the impact on human health, they're just people that know so much more. You know who Diana Rogers is? You know that person?
No.
That Google her or interview her on your show one day. She and I do really well because I understand the on the farm animal part of it, and she is the nutritionist.
Don
Rob Wolf,
Rogers
Rob Wolf,
Cattle. Is that what I
no,
should be putting in?
not cow, nutrition. She
Okay.
wrote a book called Sacred Cow.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah,
I've heard of that.
that's her. Her and Rob Wolf wrote that book.
Oh, okay.
They're both great.
Here. Right? Yeah. Okay. Was she just on the Rogan show?
She was.
Okay.
She and
I
Rob.
thought on Joe Rogan. I thought I saw that.
Yeah, she was. Yep.
Okay. Was it the one where Joe Rogan said Bill Gates has man boobs and chicken arms? Do you remember? Do you remember that?
Well, it really does, but I don't know if I don't know if it was Rogan said it or not. He probably.
Okay.
It's true. It's true.
Well, he was making the case that, you have this guy with man boobs and chicken arms being the leader in nutrition. It's like having some 96-pounder teaching people about UFC fighting or something. Okay, one other last question from ROKFIN was, this specifically, the question was like, is this a big deal? Will meat prices go up? Are there going to be shortages because of this particular incident? And I guess, do you have any thoughts on that? Like this, couple thousand cattle that died in this heat wave.
No, 2,000 cattle won't move the needle. No. If there's enough of it, yeah. I mean, but 2,000 cattle will not move the needle.
Okay. And I guess any other big thoughts? If somebody says, okay, well then do I just, this isn't that big of a deal, I'm going to kind of move on. But you have a few people who say, all right, maybe this isn't going to make a big difference, but I don't want to wait until there's a situation where there could be. What do you do? What do you recommend for people?
So I thought the question I was being asked is this 2,000 head going to affect anything? And the answer is no, it's not. Mm-hmm. It's a tiny drop in a big ocean. If you're asking me, will there be more and more events that disrupt this non-resilient supply chain? I would say that there will be, and I don't know what. And the answer is know your farmer. I'm not trying to get up a lot more business. I'm in Georgia. You're in California, I think. I don't need to ship food to California.
Washington. Yeah, so, almost as bad.
Even worse. Terrible distance. I'm not looking for customers in Washington State, but I do think that part of your resilience should be to know your farmer. And I'll tell you what we did. So we do ship online, whiteoakpastures.com. And I got embarrassed during the pandemic panic. We sell about $25 million worth of product a year in total. And about $2 million of it was on our online store. It shipped out through UPS and FedEx or whoever. And during that panic, our online business exploded, and we sold out of everything. Just there wasn't anything left. We emptied the warehouse quickly, just a few weeks. And I was embarrassed because I had customers who had done business with us for 20 years. So I've been buying all of my beef and pork and lamb and poultry from you for X years, and you've let me down. You don't have any. So, and it really embarrassed me. So my daughter, who manages our marketing, set up a loyalty program so that now we protect our, it's called the Village Loyalty Program, I think. Mm-hmm. You've got mayors and councilmen and citizens, and you do certain, but we are taking steps to, again, improve our resilience so that we won't let our faithful, loyal customers down. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's a bad idea for consumers to establish that kind of relationship with somebody. When you go to Costco or whoever, I mean, when it's gone, right?
Right. Right. You have more than just the food, the exchange of food. When you have the relationship with the producer, you have a relationship where you can exchange ideas as well. And so
Find a farmer who has built resilience into his production program. So he'll probably have the product for you. Probably. I mean, it could get so bad nobody does, but probably. Certainly, it takes more than 100-degree weather to stop it. But then you also it's incumbent upon us farmers to know who our supporters are in the good times, so that when there are bad times, we can be sure they're taken care of. And we've done that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation my dad, who lives in Florida, was just having with one of the ranchers that he buys from, talking about the same issue. And he was like, what are you guys going to do if there are, more compounding challenges? Similar operation to yours. And they're just young. They're like, oh, no, we're not going to run out. We'll just make more. And he was thinking along the lines of something you just said, could you have a CSA, you have some kind of membership program, people who are supporting you on a regular basis, they get some kind of priority, or, and I think the system will continue. If the consumers are there and the producers are there and they connect, I think the answers will come. There was one question though about, like, real fast, it just came in before I let you go, Will, about, what in a perfect world would you say the government's role would be in that? What would Will like to see as far as legislation requiring healthier food with the creation of standards similar to the organic certification, or does he prefer a more libertarian approach of farmers and their customers educating the public so they can make more informed choices and let the flow of consumer doll?
I just wish they'd quit subsidizing the wrong things. I was in D.C. last week talking about the Farm Bill with some legislators. And basically, what I think I heard is that we're going to do what we know works. There'll be some little changes within titles, but no new money in there. And I think that in so many cases the wrong things are subsidized. And I just like to see that if you can't subsidize the right thing, please don't subsidize the wrong things.
Yeah, incentivizing the market to keep going in a particular direction. That I see that not just in food, but pretty much everywhere. Will Harris of White Oak Pastures, thank you for this really informative conversation. I really appreciate it. You have any final closing thoughts for people, or do you feel like you got everything off your chest? You could talk about anything, whatever. I mean, you could talk about my Malbecs, but any final thoughts you want to leave in for the audience to ponder?
Really, it's just nothing brings about change like pain, and I just hope that I'm sorry that I'm sorry it's that way. I'm sorry that we can't be ahead of that curve and take some more preventative actions in terms of changing how we produce our food in this country.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody who's watching live. Again, if you're watching this somewhere else, consider going to a place unlike YouTube that censors, where you can watch it live. And Will, thanks again. We'll see you guys next time.